Welcome. In these next few video tutorials, I'm going to be talking to you about something called HTML. HTML is a programming language that is used to create most web pages that you see on the internet. Before we start talking about HTML, it's important that we understand what the internet is. And it's also important that we understand what the World Wide Web is. And that might seem quite confusing because most people that you speak to think that the internet and the World Wide Web are the same thing, but they're not. In fact, when we're talking about the internet and the World Wide Web, we could say that the internet actually hosts the World Wide Web. So in other words, the World Wide Web sits on the internet. So in order to understand HTML, it's first of all important to grasp an idea of what is the internet and what is the World Wide Web. So we'll start there. We'll start by looking very briefly at the history of the internet. So, internet history. Now the internet was actually developed, or the concept of the internet was developed in the late 1960s and early 1970s by ARPANET. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail about ARPANET. If you want to do a web search for ARPANET and find out what they're about, basically you'll come up with some results for DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, I think it stands for. So if you just go and research what ARPANET is, what you need to understand here is that ARPANET came up with this idea of linking all or sending packets between computers, and I don't mean literally physical packets, I mean data packets. So they came up with the idea of, okay, so if I've got a computer here in England and I've got a computer here in America, I can send data from this computer to this computer. So we've got the UK and we've got the USA. So they simply developed this concept of linking computers together throughout the world. So what actually is the internet? A good definition for the internet is, so if we're going to define internet, a good definition for internet is a global network of networks. So a global network of networks. So think about what that means. Now, if you're not sure what a network is, let's just cover that concept first. So a global network of networks. If you're at home, so if you're in your house, and you buy a computer from a shop and you set that computer up, what you'll tend to have in most computers is a monitor, a keyboard, and a CPU, which is like a tower. And what you'll do is you'll plug the CPU into a plug socket, and you'll plug the monitor into a plug socket, and this becomes your personal computer. So you can do work on your personal computer, and any files that you create, any pictures that you create on there, any images that you create are stored on that computer. And we call this a standalone computer because it's not connected to anything else apart from power. Now, if all of a sudden we use communication techniques, or we use communication services, so for example, imagine that at the back of my CPU I get something called an Ethernet lead, and I plug that into something called a router, and that router is connected to a satellite or a telephone line. It then connects me to, or it then allows me to be connected to other computers that use this same method. So just to confirm this would be a router, and this would be Ethernet. Now if I connect my computer through Ethernet to a router which is going through my telephone line, so it could be through a telephone line, it could be through a cable service. What that has then done is it has made my computer no longer a standalone machine. My computer is now connected to a network. It's now connected to the internet. Because if my computer here is connected to a cable service, well, so are other computers around the world. So another computer in someone else's home, and another computer in someone else's home, and another computer in someone else's home, all might be using cable services. And I guess what we're doing, in a sense, is we are connecting all of these together, and we are making several standalone machines then become a network of machines. So in a sense, that's what the internet is. It's a global network of networks. Now, on a grander scale, we aren't just linking computers to computers, because if you think about large organizations or schools, they tend to have computers, and they would tend to have many computers, but they would also have something called servers. So they would have big servers where they store all of the data, and they would have computers in their establishment, so whether it be a school or whether it be a large organization, and those computers connect to what we call a server. So, like I said, a server would store all the data, and then what you would do is you would connect this server, again, using possibly Ethernet, or preferably you'd use something called fiber optic. Now, don't worry too much about what these terms mean. We could say that Ethernet is literally just a cable that comes out of your computer or server and goes into a port. And fiber optic is the same, but it allows data to be transmitted faster through that cable. And again, these will be connected to a cabling service, an internet service provider, where it then becomes interlinked with everything else that's connected to that internet service provider. So this could be called my ISP. And so the internet is basically just a global, a worldwide network of networks. That's what the internet is. So if the internet is just computers or networks of networks connected together, what is the World Wide Web? Well, let's have a look at that. So, what is the World Wide Web? Or today, as we know it in short, what is the WWW? Well, the World Wide Web is, we could define that as a collection of multimedia pages or resources hosted on the internet. Hosted on the internet. So, a bit of history about the World Wide Web. The World Wide Web is, well, first of all, the World Wide Web was invented by a man called Tim Berners-Lee. So that's someone that you could go and search for on the internet. Tim Berners-Lee. Now, Tim Berners-Lee came up with the concept roughly in around 1989. He came up with this idea that if we have the internet, a global network of networks, wouldn't it be good if what I could do is have a document on my computer over in the UK with some text on it, and when I click on that text, it takes me to a document that's sat on someone else's computer in the USA. But it doesn't just take me to it, it intertwines it, it links it. So it's just like having a page in a book that when I click on a word might take me to the definition of that word. He came up with this idea of using something called hypertext to write text on a document that when I click on hypertext, when I click on it, it will automatically take me to another page that is not necessarily on my computer. And that was the key, because hypertext actually existed before Tim Berners-Lee implemented it into the World Wide Web. So again, we might be getting a little bit confused here. If we say this, if we say that the internet is a global network of networks. So again, let's just imagine that they are computers. So these are computers and they are all connected together. That's the internet. What Tim Berners-Lee had the idea of is I can create files on my computer. This is my computer here. And hypertext already existed, which means if I was on my computer here and I had a piece of text, I could make it so that this piece of text here linked to another piece of text that was also on my computer. So imagine this is my big computer here, like that, and there's another text document here. Hypertext existed. I could click on this document here and it'll take me to another page that's on my computer. But he came up with the idea of a very simple idea. What about if I had text on this document, but when I click on it, it doesn't open up a document on my computer. It actually opens up a document on someone else's computer and use the internet as the tool for making this happen. And so he invented what we call the World Wide Web, in a sense, because he came up with this idea that we are creating a web of links together between computers. So I might then click on another link on this piece of text that takes me here. And then this one would take me somewhere else, or back to the beginning. So that's the idea that he came up with. He came up with the hypertext idea. But again, he was a clever man, and he understood the fact that, well, computers were rapidly on the scene since the 1980s, and the personal computer came about, and people were buying them, and so everywhere around the world, people were buying different personal computers. So some people might have a Macintosh, and some people might have a PC, and these different computers were running different applications. So, for example, a PC would be running an operating system. It wouldn't be Windows then, but running an operating system whereby you could actually create a Word document. But someone on a Mac might not be using, or wouldn't be able to create what you would now know as a Microsoft Word document. They would actually be using a different application. So he said, well, look, I need some sort of standard. I need some sort of standard that I can create a document on this machine that will then link to a document on this machine. And again, that was the beauty of his idea, simple idea, but there were complexities. I want to link these documents together, but they're not on the same computer, they're not necessarily in the same format, so what can I do? Well, he kept it very simple. He came up with this idea that what we will do is we will have our own language, and this language actually would end up being what we are trying to get towards, which is HTML. But HTML wasn't something new either, because it was just extended from something that already HTML, Standard Generalized Markup Language, was actually an internationally agreed upon method for marking up text into structural units. So there was this standard that existed to create paragraphs and headings inside documents. And this standard would use very simple terms, so it would use things like, okay, if I wanted to create a title in a document, I would use title, and I would then put my title. So my title would say hello, and then I would close this title like that. And this HTML had a very structured, and like I say, it was an internationally agreed upon method for marking up text within documents. And so what Tim Berners-Lee did is he said, well, look, I need to develop this sort of language that allows me to be able to link from one document to another that might be on a different operating system, that might be on a different computer, that might be in different software applications. And rather than develop a brand new language, I'll create this thing called HTML that will be based upon this thing called HTML. And that's what I'll do. And so Tim Berners-Lee invented HTML, and roughly the date that this came to light was around 1992. And I put that on there because if you think about, that's not that long ago. Think about what the internet and the World Wide Web is now, today, only 20 years on. And in 1992, Tim Berners-Lee invented the HTML, which would then allow us to have access to what would become the World Wide Web.